The quarter hit the dirt before anybody could stop it, and that was how I knew the boy was a fool. I was standing at the back rail of the Drummond stockyard where I always stand, close enough to see and far enough not to be asked anything. It was the tail end of a Saturday sale, the part where the good stock is gone and what's left is the kind of animal a man buys when he's run out of better ideas. The auctioneer, a thick fellow named Pell with a voice like a saw blade, had been trying to move a crate of coals for 10 minutes. 3 pups left in it. 2 of them sold to a rancher out of 2 for $1 each. No haggling, because they were quiet and round and would grow into something useful. The third one nobody wanted. You could hear why before you could see why. It was making a sound I don't have a good word for, not a bark, not a whine, something low and continuous that came up out of its chest like water boiling under a lid. When Pell's man reached into the crate to lift it for show, the pup took him across the back of the hand and drew blood, and the man swore and dropped it back in, and the whole front row laughed in that way men laugh when they're glad it wasn't them. 25 cents, Pell said, finally disgusted. 2 bits and it's gone. I'll give it away. Somebody take the thing before it eats my help. That's when the quarter came down. It rolled off the boy's palm and bounced once on the packed dirt and spun on its edge for a second, the way a coin does when the whole room has gone quiet enough to watch it. I remember thinking, even then, that it was a strange and almost ceremonial little sound, that spin, like the start of something I wasn't going to be able to look away from. The boy bent and picked it up and held it out flat. 2 bits, he said. He couldn't have been more than 20. Lean in the way that isn't healthy, the kind of lean where you can see a man's been making one meal stretch into 2. A canvas coat on the color of dust. A face that hadn't shaved in a few days and didn't seem too worried about it. He had a way of standing that I'd seen before in men who'd come up hard, weight even on both feet, hands loose, like he was always half ready to either run or take a hit, and had decided long ago that it didn't much matter which. Pell looked at him the way you look at a man who's just volunteered for something stupid. Son, that dog'll bite you. Most things do, the boy said. And that was the first time I laughed out loud at the Drummond stockyard in maybe 2 years, and I covered it with a cough, because I didn't want to be a man who'd encouraged it. I should tell you who I am since I'm the one doing the telling. My name is Walt Renner and I've run cattle on the bench land north of here for 41 years, and for the last 6 of them I've done it mostly alone since I buried the only person who ever made the place feel like more than a job. I keep a ledger, have my whole life. Not just the money, though God knows the money column has gotten thin, but the days, weather, births, deaths. Which heifer threw early, which fence post rotted, what the price of feed did to my stomach. My wife used to say I'd write down my own funeral if they gave me time. I told her somebody had to, since nobody else was paying attention. I write all this down because I want to be accurate about the boy, and about the dog, and about what came after, and I don't trust memory to do it kindly. Memory rounds the corners off. The ledger doesn't. So, Saturday, the pup changed hands for a quarter that the boy then had to bend down and pick back up, because Pell, being Pell, wouldn't take the coin once the joke was over. Keep it, he said. You'll need it more than I will for the doctoring. Meaning the bites the boy was sure to take. I watched him carry the crate out to a truck older than he was. He set it in the bed gentle as if it held eggs and not a small animal that wanted to kill him, and he stood there a minute with both hands on the rim of the crate, looking down into it. The pup had gone quiet, that worse kind of quiet, where you can feel an animal deciding. And the boy just looked at it, and it looked at him, and neither of them did anything for the longest while. Then he said something to it. I was too far to hear, but I saw his mouth move, just a few words, and I saw the way his shoulders came down off his ears when he said them, the way a man's body lets go of something. And then he got in the truck and the engine caught on the 3rd try and he was gone in a tail of dust down the county road. I'd have forgotten the whole thing by Tuesday if he hadn't turned out to be my neighbor. The Haverson place had been empty 2 years. Good land, bad luck, Old Per Havorson died owing more than the place was worth, and the bank had been sitting on it, asking a price nobody local could pay, until apparently somebody not local found a way. The boy's name, I learned at the feed store the following week, was Cyrus. Cyrus Webb. He'd taken the place on some arrangement I didn't fully understand and didn't ask about, the way you don't ask a drowning man how he learned to hold his breath. He had a little money and a lot of nothing else. No wife, no hands, no people that anybody could find. Just him and a quarter's worth of dog and 400 acres that had beaten a better man than him into the ground. The feed store talk was not kind. It rarely is. They had him pegged as a fool with a head start on failing, and they weren't entirely wrong, and I knew it, and I still found myself bothered by the smugness of it. Maybe because I'd been the new fool once. Maybe because I was old enough now to have buried most of the men who doubted me, and burying your doubters is a hollow kind of winning. Whatever the reason, the next Sunday I drove the 4 miles of fence line that separated my land from the Havorson place, Webb place now, and I found the boy in the yard, and I found out about the dog. He was bleeding when I pulled up. Not bad. A long red line down the meat of his forearm, the kind a young animal's teeth make when it hasn't learned yet how to do real damage and is just practicing. He'd wrapped it in a strip of rag and the rag had gone through. He saw my truck and stood up from where he'd been crouched by an old chicken coop he'd turned into a kennel, and he didn't smile and he didn't scowl, he just waited to see what I wanted. Careful. Always careful, that boy. Walt Renner, I said, leaning out the window, I run the place east of you. I know who you are. He nodded at the bench land you could see from his yard, the long green shoulder of it. Yours is the only fence around here that's still standing. 40 years of stubborn, I said. It's the only thing I'm good at. He almost smiled then, almost. I looked at the coop. Inside it, in the shadow, the pup had pressed itself into the far corner and was making that boiling sound again, low and steady, every hair on its body standing up so it looked twice the size it was. It was an ugly little thing, if I'm honest. Brindle and patch, one ear up and one folded, ribs you could have played like a washboard, eyes the yellow-brown of creek water. Everything about it said, I will hurt you before I let you hurt me. I'd seen that look on dogs, and I'd seen it on men, and it always came from the same place. You know what you bought? I asked him. A dog nobody wanted. You bought trouble. That animal's been hurt by somebody. You can see it. They don't go that way on their own. I'd kept dogs my whole life, working dogs, good ones, and I'd taken in a couple of broken ones and learned the hard way that some of them don't come back from it. Sometimes you can fix it. Sometimes you put a lot of good years into something that bites your child the one day you let your guard down. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I know. He was quiet a while. He crouched back down, slow, near the coop, not too near, and the pup's growl pitched up a notch and he didn't react to it at all, just let it wash over him like weather. My old man used to say that about me, Cyrus said, not looking at me, looking at the dog, that I was trouble somebody'd put there, that whoever had me before him broke me and he was just the fool stuck with the bill. A muscle moved in his jaw, so I figure I owe one of us a different ending. I didn't have anything to say to that. I'm a man who always has something to say, ask anybody, and I sat there in my truck with the engine ticking, and I didn't have one word. You want help with that arm, I said finally. I've got a kit better than that rag. I'm all right. I know you are. I put the truck in gear. Offer stands anyway, for the arm or anything else. I'm 4 miles of fence away and I don't sleep much. I'd gone maybe 100 yards down his drive when I looked in the mirror and saw him still crouched by that coop, talking low to the thing inside it, the way you gentle a horse, the way you talk to somebody on a ledge. And I thought, that boy is going to lose this fight. And I thought, God, I hope I'm wrong. And both of those were true at once and have stayed true in their way every day since. He named it 2 bits. I found that out a couple weeks on, when I brought over a sack of decent dog feed I told him was extra. It wasn't extra. I'd bought it for him, but a man's pride is a thing you have to lie around sometimes if you want to get past it. He took it without saying much, which is the only way a proud man can take charity, and as he set it down inside the coop he said, "Easy, 2 bits," to the corner, and the corner growled and he said it again. "Easy, easy, the way you'd say it to something you loved." "2 bits," I said, "for what you paid." For what they said he was worth. He latched the coop. Figured if I called him that every day, one of us would stop believing it eventually. That was the boy all over. He'd say a thing like that, a thing that put a stone in your chest, and then he'd go right back to whatever he was doing like he hadn't just told you the whole shape of his life in 9 words. I started coming by more after that. Told myself it was neighborly. Told myself an old man checks on a new one because that's how it's done out here, and there's truth in that. But the fuller truth is that I was lonely in a way I hadn't admitted to since the funeral. And the boy and his terrible dog were the most alive thing within 4 miles of my kitchen table. And I went toward them the way you go toward a fire on a cold night, without entirely deciding to. What I watched over those first weeks was a slow and bloody and unglamorous kind of patience, the kind nobody puts in a story because it doesn't make a good one. He didn't tame that dog with love. That's the lie people tell. He tamed it with showing up. Every single day, 3 times a day, food through the same gap at the same hour. And he never grabbed and he never cornered, and he never once raised his hand even the day 2 bits opened his arm to the bone, and he had to drive himself one-handed to the county clinic for stitches. He came back that same evening, arm in a sling, and fed the dog at the regular time, talking low, "Easy, easy." And I stood at the fence line and watched him do it, and I had to turn around and walk back to my truck, because there are things a man my age can't watch without his eyes going. The dog bit the hand that fed it over and over for weeks, and the hand kept coming back. I asked him once why he didn't just give up. It was a cruel question, and I knew it when it left my mouth. He was sitting on an overturned bucket outside the coop with a tin plate of beans gone cold in his lap, too tired to eat them, and the dog was watching him from the dark of the coop, watching him the way it always did, hungry and hatting and afraid all at once. "Because nobody gave up on me until it was too late to matter," he said, "and I always wondered what would have happened if just one of them had stuck." The dog growled. Cyrus didn't look away from me. "I'm not doing this for the dog," he said. "I mean, I am, but that's not the whole of it." He looked down at the cold beans. "I just want to find out if it's possible, that's all. I want to find out if a thing that everybody wrote off can come back if you just refuse to leave." His voice had gone rough. "Because if it can't, then I've been lying to myself my whole life, and I'd rather know. I want to tell you I had wisdom for that. 40 years of it. I didn't. I just sat with him in the falling dark while his beans got colder and the dog watched us both, and after a while I said, 'Eat your supper, son,' because that was the only true and useful thing I had, and he ate it. And that was the first night I felt like maybe I'd stopped being the neighbor and started being something nearer to needed. There's a thing I have to set down here, even though we're only at the start of it, because it changes how you'll read everything that comes after, and I told you I'd be accurate. About 5 weeks in, the dog stopped growling at one specific moment of the day. It was the moment Cyrus came out at first light. Every other hour of the day, the boiling sound. But in the gray before dawn, when the boy came out of that sagging house with his coat half-buttoned and his breath showing and crossed the frosted yard to the coop, for that 1 minute, the dog went quiet. Not friendly. Not yet. But quiet. Watching the boy come the way you'd watch the one thing in the world you decided not to be afraid of. I only saw it because I'd taken to driving over early, before my own chores, with coffee in a thermos, telling myself it was because the boy looked like he wasn't eating, which was true, and not because the only thing that got me out of my cold bed those mornings any more was wanting to see whether the dog would be quiet again. I'd park at the fence line and I'd watch the boy cross the yard, and I'd watch that hard, ruined animal go still at the sight of him, and I'd think about my wife, and I'd think about all the years, and I'd drink my coffee and not say anything to anybody because there wasn't anybody to say it to. It was the smallest thing, one quiet minute in a day full of growling. But I'd lived long enough to know that's how everything starts, small, and at dawn, and before you've decided to let yourself hope. I wrote it in the ledger that night. Webb's dog quiet at first light, 5 weeks, maybe. I underline maybe. I've learned too. The land out here has a way of taking the things you underline twice and making you eat them. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to ask the boy to put on the table before it let him keep anything at all. The trouble didn't come from the dog. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it. The trouble came from a man, the way it usually does, and the dog was just the one who paid for it first. By the second month, Cyrus could put his hand flat inside the coop and leave it there. 2 bits wouldn't take it, but he'd come, sometimes, and put his cold nose against the boy's knuckles and then retreat to his corner, ashamed of himself, like an animal that's been punished so long for wanting things that the wanting itself has become the crime. I watched it happen the first time. The boy held so still I thought he'd stopped breathing. And when the dog touched him and fled, Cyrus didn't grab, didn't praise, didn't do anything but slowly pull his hand back and stand up and turn around so the dog couldn't see his face. But I could, and I will not tell you what was on it because it was his, and some things a man earns the right to keep. The dog was getting better. That's the thing I need you to hold onto through what comes next. The boy was winning, slow and bloody and a 1/4 inch at a time, but winning. And then Dale Mercer's heifer got out. Dale ran the place south of the Webland, and Dale was a hard man in the way that has nothing to admire in it, hard with his stock, hard with his hands, hard with anybody smaller than him, which by his reckoning was most people. He'd been one of the loudest at the feed store about the fool who'd bought the Haverson place, and he'd made a couple of low offers on that land himself before the boy got it, and he was the kind of man who remembers being told no the way other men remember being robbed. His heifer pushed through a stretch of bad fence, Dale's fence, his neglect, though he'd never once in his life admit that a thing was his fault, and wandered onto the Webb place, and somewhere in the gray of an October morning she came too near the coop, and 2 bits, who had been kicked and starved and beaten by every large thing that had ever loomed up out of the dark at him, did what he had been made to do by hands that weren't the boy's. He came over the wire and he went for her. He didn't get much. A dog that sighs against a heifer, he got a torn ear on her and a few seconds of noise, and then she was gone, bawling, back through the gap she'd come in by. By the time Cyrus got out there, it was over, and the dog was standing in the middle of the yard, shaking, ears flat, that boiling sound coming up out of him. Not at the boy, at the whole world, at the shape of his own life that he couldn't get out of no matter how quiet the mornings had gotten. It would have been nothing. A scared dog, a scratched cow, a bad fence. The kind of thing neighbors settle with a handshake and a few cuss words. But it was Dale. He came up the Webb Drive that afternoon in his big truck with a rifle on the rack and his jaw set, and I happened to be there, thank God, because I don't like to think what that afternoon would have been without a witness. He got out and he didn't say good morning, and he didn't say your dog and mine had a misunderstanding. He said, "That animal's a stock killer and I want it put down, and if you won't do it, I'll do it for you, and I'm within my rights either way." And the worst of it, the part that put ice in me, is that he was. Out here the law on a dog that goes after livestock is old and short and on Dale's side. A stock-killing dog is a dead dog. That's the rule, and it's a rule born of hard country and hungry winters, and most of the time it's even a fair one. It just wasn't fair this time, but fair and legal have never been the same animal. I watched the boy take it. I watched him stand in his own yard and understand, in about 4 seconds, that the thing he had bled for 2 months to save could be taken from him by a man who'd never bled for anything but his own pride. I watched him get very, very still. "He's not a stock killer," Cyrus said, quiet. "He's scared, there's a difference." "Tell it to the heifer," Dale said. "Your fence is down. She came onto my land." He defended his ground, any dog. I don't argue with squatters about dogs. Dale shifted the rifle on his shoulder, not pointing it, just letting it be seen. You've got till the end of the week. After that I come back and it's done, and you can watch or you can go inside, makes no difference to me which. He left. The dust of him hung in the cold air a long time. I expected the boy to break. I'd have understood it. Instead he went and crouched by the coop, where Two Bits had wedged himself into the farthest corner, shaking still, and he stayed there, not talking, not even doing the easy, just being there in the cold with the animal until the light went out of the sky. I left him a thermos and I went home and I sat at my kitchen table and I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I prayed. I'm not a praying man. I gave it up around the same time I gave up expecting the land to be kind. But I sat there that night and I asked whatever's out there to not let that boy lose this. Because I understood by then that it had stopped being about the dog. It had never really been about the dog. Here is the heavy thing. Here is the choice, the one the boy had to make, the one I've turned over in my own hands every quiet night since. There was a way out. I found it for him. I drove 40 miles the next morning to a fellow I knew, a man who trained dogs for the sheriff's department down in the valley, a man with a soft spot for hard cases. I told him about Two Bits, all of it, the auction and the quarter and the boiling sound and the quiet mornings, and he said he'd take him. He'd take the dog, quiet, no questions, get him out of the county before Dale's week was up. The dog would live. He'd be worked with by professionals, in a kennel, with a job and a fenced run and never another kick as long as he lived. But he'd never see the boy again. That was the price. Get him out of Dale's reach meant get him out of Cyrus's life completely, for good, no visits, a clean cut, because a dog like that can't half belong to two places. It'd tear him apart worse than staying. I drove home with that in my pocket like a stone, and I gave it to the boy plain, the whole of it, the good and the cost both, because I'd promised myself I'd never lie to him even around his pride. He lives, I said, but you don't get to keep him. That's the deal. He goes today, he lives, and you never see him again. Or he stays, and at the end of this week Dale comes up that road with a rifle, and I can't promise you how that ends, for the dog or for you, because I've seen your face and I don't think you'll stand aside. And Dale's the kind that's been waiting his whole life for a reason. The boy sat with it, a long time, out by the coop, where Two Bits watched him through the wire, ears half up now, that one folded ear, those creekwater eyes. If he goes, Cyrus said slowly, he lives. He lives. But he goes back in a cage with strangers, even good strangers. His voice was very low. He spends his whole life being handled by people who know what they're doing, safe, worked with, fed on time. He swallowed. And he never finds out. Finds out what? That somebody stayed. The boy's jaw was working. That a thing everybody wrote off could come all the way back if just one person refused to leave. He almost knows it, Walt. He's almost there. Another month and he stopped. Pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes hard once. If I send him off to be safe, he lives, but he dies not knowing the one thing I bought him to find out. And so do I. I have lived a long time and made a lot of hard calls, and I am telling you I did not know what was right. I still don't. There's a version of love that ships the thing you love off to safety and lets it never know your name. And there's a version that stays and bets everything. And I've never been able to decide which one is the brave one and which is the selfish one. And any man who tells you he knows for certain has never actually had to choose. The boy chose to stay. He doesn't go in another cage, Cyrus said. Not for me, not to make this easier on me. He came too far. He stood up. I'll talk to Dale. Dale doesn't talk. Then I'll do something else. And there was a thing in his voice when he said it, flat and final, that scared me more than Dale's rifle had. I called the valley man back and told him no, thank you, and I hung up the phone and I stood in my kitchen and I thought, you damned fool boy, you've just bet a life you finally won on a hand you can't see. And under that, quieter, treacherously. But if it works. If it works. The storm came in the last night of Dale's week, which is the kind of timing that makes a man believe the land has a sense of humor and that it's a black one. It came down off the high country the way the bad ones do. No warning a townsman would notice, just a shift in how the air sat, a green color to the late light, the cattle bunching up against the south fence without being told to. I'd lived here long enough to read it. I called the boys' line and got nothing, the wire down already somewhere between us, and I stood at my window and watched the first of it come across the bench land like a gray wall pulled by a hand, and I thought about Cyrus alone over there with his dog and his rifle week running out, and I did a foolish thing for a man my age. I got in the truck and I drove into it. I want to be careful here about what I know and what I was told, because I wasn't there for the heart of it. I was 4 miles of bad road away, fighting a wheel in a whiteout, and by the time I got to the Webb place, it was over and I only saw the end. The middle of it I have from the boy, told to me in pieces over the weeks after, in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who stopped being able to dress a thing up. Here is what happened. The storm took the power and then it took the temperature, dropping it faster than the boy had ever felt it drop, and somewhere in the first black hour of it he heard, under the wind, a sound that wasn't the wind. A truck engine gunned and then silent. And then nothing. It was Dale. Dale had come up the Webb Road in the leading edge of the storm, to do the thing he'd promised, the rifle thing, end of the week. He was a man who kept that kind of appointment. And the road had gone to ice under him and put his truck into the ditch where the culvert washes out every spring. And the truck had rolled, and Dale was in it, pinned, with the cab folding in around his legs and the cold coming down like a judgment. The boy didn't know any of that. He knew there'd been an engine and then a crash and then silence out in the worst night of the year on his road. He went out into it. Of course he did. I never had to ask whether he would. And the dog went with him. This is the part I can't fully account for. The part the boy himself couldn't, the part that left the few of us who ever heard the whole of it with nothing to say. 2 bits, the quarter dog, the bite dog, the stock killer Dale had come up that very road to shoot. That dog went out into the storm at the boy's heel and did not leave it. Out into the kind of cold that kills, toward the man who'd promised to put him in the ground. The dog stayed with the boy because the boy was going, and the boy had become, somewhere in those quiet dawns, the one large thing in the world that 2 bits had decided not to run from. They found the truck by the dog. That's the part the boy says plainest. Cyrus was blind in it, couldn't see his own hand, was working down the ditch line on memory and luck, and it was the dog that found the wreck, the dog that put his nose to the wind and went rigid and made a sound the boy had never heard out of him, not the boiling growl, something else, something urgent, and led him the last 40 yards to where Dale Mercer hung upside down in a folded cab, conscious, just, and freezing. I will not pretty up what came next, because the boy didn't. He got Dale out. It took the better part of an hour in the dark in that cold, with the wind trying to take him off his feet, and the only light he had at the end was my headlights finding them at last through the white as I came skidding up the road with my heart going like a drum. The boy had Dale's arm over his shoulders and was dragging him toward the road, and the dog was circling them, pressed against the boy's legs, keeping between him and the dark like it was holding back the night itself. We got Dale into my truck. He was alive. He stayed alive. He lost 2 toes to the cold and most of his swagger to the shame, and he never did come back up that road with a rifle, and he never said thank you in any words because men like Dale can't. But he tore up the thing he'd filed with the county the very next week, and he paid to fix his own fence, and as far as I know, he never spoke a hard word about that dog again as long as he lived. Some men can only apologize by going quiet. It's a poor kind of sorry. It was the only kind he had. But I'm getting ahead, and I don't want to, because the thing I actually need to set down, the thing that left everyone speechless, to use the words off the front of this, wasn't the rescue. The rescue is just the part you can tell at the feed store. The real thing happened after in my truck, with the heater roaring and Dale half-conscious in the back seat, and the storm still screaming against the glass. The boy got in beside me, soaked through, shaking so hard he couldn't talk. And the dog that for 2 months had not once let a hand close all the way around him, the dog that had opened the boy's arm to the bone and bitten every kindness that ever came near it, the dog climbed up into the cab, and across the boy's lap, and pressed the whole shaking length of itself against his chest, and put its head up under his chin, and stayed there. It stayed there. And Cyrus, who had not cried in front of me, who had taken the threat and the stitches and the long bloody patience and the impossible choice all without breaking, Cyrus put both arms around that animal and bent his head down over it and came apart completely, silently, the way a man does when the thing he refused to believe in for his whole life turns out, against every reason, to be true. I drove. I kept my eyes on the white road, and I did not look over, because some things you witness by not looking. And under the storm and the heater and the boy's breath catching, I heard him say it, just once, into the dog's wet fur, so low I almost lost it. "Somebody stayed," he said. "See, somebody stayed." I don't know if he was talking to the dog. I've thought about it every day since, and I don't think he was. I think he was talking to a kicked and starving boy from a long time ago that nobody ever came back for. I think he'd spent 20 years and a quarter and 2 months of blood trying to prove to that boy that it could have gone different, that a thing everyone writes off can come all the way back if just one person refuses to leave. And that night, in my truck, with a half-feral dog folded against his chest, and a man he should have hated breathing in the back seat because the dog had found him, that night he finally had his proof. I never did write the end of it in the ledger. I've sat down to 100 times. The book's still open on my table to the page where I stopped. It just never seemed like the kind of thing the land should be allowed to get its hands on. Some things you keep out of the book, some things you keep. The boy's still over there. The dog sleeps inside now by the stove, and it still doesn't much care for strangers, and it has never once, not in all the years since, growled at first light. Last week I drove over with the coffee like I do, and the boy was on his porch in the cold, and the dog was leaned against his leg, gray around the muzzle now, both of them watching the sun come up the same way they watch everything together. And I parked at the fence line, and I didn't get out right away. I just sat there a minute with my hand on the door.